Okay, thank you so much. Today's class is on heart health, and my name is Madia. I'm a certified holistic nutritionist, and we do these about once a month. I think some of you have been in class before, and we just kind of cycle through them. It's very casual, and I love it when you guys can ask me some questions in the chat box to make it a little more interactive, so it's not just me talking up here. But you all have a handout, and we're going to go through that together, and I kind of read out all the information just because it is recorded so people can go back and hear it later. Okay, so pull up the handout, and I'm also going to read a passage from a book at some point, and let's get started. So, eating for heart health. We are a heart-sick society with heart disease being the leading cause of death for both men and women in America, coming in at a whopping 100,000 deaths per year, about 1 in every 3 deaths. So this comes up a lot over and over again in, in health in general. And just every time we're going to the doctor, they're kind of looking at this just because it's so common, especially as we get older. Heart disease is also extremely expensive, costing us over $475 billion each year. That being said, the causes of heart disease have been wildly misunderstood until very recently, with saturated fat and cholesterol taking the brunt of the blame. So what I'm going to talk about in this handout is kind of what we've learned in the past, and a lot of these nutrition classes with me are kind of undoing some of this information that we have been taught throughout the 90s in particular. And nutrition is a constantly ever-changing and growing subject, which is kind of hard to keep up with. But we're always learning new things and kind of updating our concepts from the past and our beliefs from the past based on new science. So this is definitely one of those things that qualifies. So key concepts today are going to be that cholesterol is not the culprit, and I'll explain a little bit more in detail on why that is. Number 2, microbiome and a varied diet, why that's important, why fiber is important. Fiber comes up over and over again, but with heart health, it is important for a number of reasons. Antioxidants are often linked to heart health and heart healthy foods. So we're going to talk about why we want to have as many antioxidants as possible in our diet. And then also vitamins and minerals. So in particular, B vitamins, vitamin E, magnesium, and potassium. And we'll delve into that in a little more detail. So first of all, what is cardiovascular disease, or CVD? Cardiovascular disease is classified as any disease of the heart or blood vessels. And it's not a single disease per se, but rather a constellation of conditions affecting our circulatory system. And this can include arterial sclerosis, which is hardening of the arteries, atherosclerosis, which is a form of arterial sclerosis that involves the buildup of plaque and fats and cholesterol and other substances that narrow the arteries, restricting blood flow. And that's kind of that classic one that we think of that causes the heart attack, because it's the plaque building up. And we're going to talk about how that happens. Coronary artery disease, CAD, any disease that affects the arteries of the heart, reducing oxygen and nutrient flow. Embolism, which is a large blood clot. Hypertension, high blood pressure. Stroke, blood clotting or bleeding in the brain. Heart failure, which is an inability of the heart to pump sufficient blood to the rest of the body. Or arrhythmias, which is any change in the rhythm of the heartbeat. So all of these things go under cardiovascular disease, which is why it is such a large range and such a kind of common issue in America. So let's just delve right into the cholesterol myth. So cholesterol is actually a vital component of all animals. It plays a role in digesting fats, strengthening cell membranes, insulating nerve sheaths, and hormone production. We can't function without it. Cholesterol can become detrimental when it's oxidized in response to inflammation. So this is where it kind of got off track and started to get a bad name is when it starts changing under oxidation, and then it can become an issue. Even when you avoid cholesterol containing products, the liver will produce cholesterol from proteins, carbohydrates, or fats. So our body is constantly making cholesterol, and it's not usually affected in a very big way by our dietary cholesterol, which is kind of amazing because we used to think that for a long time. I still hear people say it in response to, you know, something with a lot of butter on it or bacon or whatever it is that's the animal containing cholesterol food item. They say, oh my gosh, my cholesterol is going up just looking at that or something. And now we know that it really doesn't have to do so much with dietary cholesterol. It has to do with other things that are affecting your body's ability to make cholesterol or kind of stimulating that. Most of the groundbreaking research done on cholesterol-rich diets were done on rabbits, which are natural herbivores who respond differently to dietary cholesterol. So this is another thing that comes up quite a bit with old, outdated studies, is people looking at the study and realizing, oh, this doesn't really apply to, you know, human beings or whatever it is. I'm going to read you a passage from a book that's interesting, because most of these studies are ending up being very flawed in this way. Like, you know, I think in this particular study, they were feeding cholesterol to rabbits and it was affecting the rabbits in a negative way. And then they took that and kind of correlated it to human health, when really those are two very different animals. So cholesterol is a healing substance. It responds to inflammation in the arterial walls by coming in and patching up the injured areas. So you can see how that leads to issues when there is a lot of inflammation already in your arterial walls, and then cholesterol is coming in kind of as a band-aid to smooth out that area. And then if it builds up over time, that's where you get the atherosclerosis, where it's actually blocking the artery. People with very low cholesterol levels may actually be more susceptible to infectious disease. LDL cholesterol helps neutralize dangerous bacterial toxins and supports the immune system. So we probably know that there are two different kinds of cholesterol. There's the LDL and the HDL. HDL has always been deemed the good, and LDL is the bad, but you do need both in certain levels to be healthy. Cholesterol levels lower than 160 have been linked to depression, aggression, and amnesia. It's not about good or bad cholesterol. What we really want to do now in 2023 is to pay attention more to ratios. So the ratio between those two, HDL and LDL, as well as particle size. So with LDL, which is the one that you do typically want to be a little bit on the lower side, you want more of the light, fluffy particle size rather than a small, dense particle size, which can cause a little more damage if oxidized. So since we're talking about cholesterol, I want to show you this book. That's really interesting. If anybody has, I don't know, is this mirrored when you see this, or is it backwards?
No, we see it correctly.
Oh yeah, okay. Because when I look into the screen, it's backwards. So, and I saw somewhere that on Zoom, it mirrors it for people. So you're seeing like the inverse side. So that's cool. This book is called The Big Fat Surprise by Nina Teicholz. And it kind of takes all of this information that we learned from the 90s and kind of talks about why it was misinformation. And it's got like this whole back half. You can see like this much of the book is references. So it's a really well versed scientific book. But I want to talk about this chapter here, why we think saturated fat is unhealthy and how we got onto that track. So the idea that fat and saturated fat are unhealthy has been so ingrained in our national conversation for so long that we tend to think of it more as common sense, which is what I'm talking about when we have these, you know, conversations in passing or at the dinner table or whatever, where people are saying things like, oh, my cholesterol is going to go up just looking at those eggs. Or, I mean, I just had this conversation the other day with my boyfriend's dad, who he's in his late 60s. So he has had that really ingrained in him that animal fats are it's the worst thing you can eat. And you should only have, plant foods. And the the conclusion to most of my lessons is going to be just to have a varied diet. And we're all going to pick and choose within that. But let me just continue this passage. So it's become, we tend to think of it more as common sense than a scientific hypothesis. But like any of our beliefs about the links between diet disease, this one too began as an idea, which is dangerous when it comes to food and science and stuff like that. So this began as an idea proposed by a group of researchers with its origin fixed at a moment in time. The hypothesis that saturated fat causes heart disease was developed in the early 1950s by Ansel Benjamin Keys, a biologist and pathologist at the University of Minnesota. At his lab, he ran experiments looking for early indications of disease, and in the 1950s, no health issue seemed more urgent than the problem of heart disease. So it's also interesting to think about where we're seeing these rise in diseases. It's possible that that was something that wasn't being paid attention to much in the past, but it's also, I always thought it was interesting that the 1950s was in correlation with kind of like the agricultural revolution and having a big diet change in general. Americans felt themselves to be in the midst of a terrible epidemic. A sudden tightening of the chest would strike men in their prime on the golf course or in the office, and doctors didn't know why. The disease had appeared seemingly out of nowhere and had grown quickly to become the nation's leading cause of death. Thus, when Keys first proposed his ideas about dietary fat, the backdrop was a tense and fearful nation thirsting for answers. At the time, the prevailing view held that human arteries slowly narrowed as an inevitable accompaniment of aging and that modern medicine could do little about it. Keys, by contrast, thought that heart attacks could be avoided based on the simple logic that there had not always been such an epidemic. And so I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but he basically saw the cholesterol in the arteries and thought, oh, that looks like dietary fat. So it must be dietary fat that's like clogging up our arteries. And now we know that that's not really how that works. It doesn't just get in there and turn into sludge. So the point of that is to just say that it was this one guy that came up with this idea and kind of ran with it, and then everybody else also ran with it, and it caused a lot of damage over time, just from people really changing their diets. And then we went in this whole fat-free rampage, taking fats out of all of our food products. Everybody was having skim milk. And now we know that it's better to have foods in their whole forms and not take them apart. So if cholesterol isn't the culprit, what is the leading cause of heart disease? And so what we're thinking now is that it's kind of just inflammation, like underlying low-grade inflammation. And that can be caused from a number of health conditions. It could be something as simple as gingivitis or tooth infections, gut-related bacteria like H. pylori or C. diff, nanobacteria, hepatitis, chronic mononucleosis, which is mono, or even dysbiosis from food sensitivities, and leaky gut can play a role. Since our gut is our window to the outside world, we must focus here first. It always comes back to that. Always comes back to the microbiome. So any questions so far? Is this news to anyone? I feel like we kind of all know this by now, right? Okay. So our microbiome health affects heart health. The human body is inhabited by a number of bacteria, archaea, viruses, and eukaryotes. The collection of microorganisms that lives in coexistence with their hosts has been referred to as the microbiota or microbiome. Changes in the composition of gut microbiota associated with disease, often referred to as dysbiosis, has been linked to pathologies such as atherosclerosis, hypertension, and heart failure. Over the past 100 years, our gut bacteria has changed drastically. This has come from both a change in diet as well as a change in lifestyle. Characteristics of oral microbiotic have been detected in atherosclerotic plaque, so in humans. So this is why dental hygiene is key. Whenever we have something going on in our mouth, it goes directly into our bloodstream. And if it's bad enough, it can actually go straight to the heart and be fatal. You know, like that's one of those things that you hear about. You always want to keep your mouth microbiome and mouth health as good as possible. So some vitamins like vitamin K come from our gut bacteria, and that's really important because that's not going to be produced if our gut microbiome isn't healthy. The gut microbiome, functioning as a virtual endocrine system, communicates with distal organs through metabolism dependent pathways. Metabolites from our digestive process can impact our disease risk when we have an unhealthy or unbalanced microbiome. So then we're going to get into a little bit of red meat, choline, and heart disease. This is more kind of debunking myths and talking about why certain things get demonized. So most of us grew up with the idea that red meat is harmful, and perhaps it's not so easy to leave that mantra behind, even when you think you have. I still hear this quite a bit too. And again, we're all going to be eating different things, hopefully, and not relying on any one source of protein. The original correlation between red meat and increased heart disease, which used to be about saturated fat, has now been linked to a metabolite or substance produced during digestion and metabolism called trimethylene N-oxide, or TMAO. TMAO can be formed when we eat foods that contain choline, not only red meat, but also eggs, fish, and poultry. These conclusions were based off of epidemiological studies, which are very hard to track and control. So this is another one of those things with food and nutrition, is that they're almost always these epidemiological studies, which means that they basically have a group of people eating a certain thing and then trying to track it. But these kind of studies can be really hard because most of us can't remember, you know, what we had for breakfast a few days ago, or people lie. That's the other problem with this kind of thing, is oftentimes with studies, they're trying to do the best they can in the eyes of, in the eyes of the scientists, or they're trying to make themselves seem like they did better than they actually did. So oftentimes when you're studying a group of people, which is what these are, there's going to be some flaws in the study just because it's hard to be really, really accurate. You can't really keep people in one place and force feed them or whatever. So high TMAO levels are correlated with an increase in cholesterol deposits. A finding in the study determined that the red meat eaters did not produce TMAO after a course of antibiotics, so there may be some sort of other thing at play there. If you're overweight, your body makes TMAO from visceral fat, which is also interesting. When we have visceral fat, it becomes kind of its own endocrine organ, so it's able to produce metabolites like TMAO and other things. A breakdown in the intestinal barrier, which occurs in dysbiosis and SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, may increase heart disease risk by elevating the number of circulating LDL particles in the bloodstream. Genetics and overall gut health plays a role in how TMAO is expressed. And then this is just, like I said, another reason to eat a varied diet. There are certain people that swear on eating I don't know if you've seen, like, there's this guy, Liver King, who eats only animal products and only red meat. And I can't imagine that he's that healthy. It just sounds like such a bad recipe for health. But the idea here is that there's going to be things in each food that we eat that may or may not be harmful on some level. You know, seafood has a lot of mercury in it. Kale and other cruciferous vegetables have something called goitrogens, which can affect your thyroid. And the idea is that in small amounts, these things aren't anything to worry about, but sometimes the media or whatever, certain doctors or people will get a hold of these little tidbits of information and kind of make it into more of a buzzword, or kind of like demonizing this one whole group of things. In this case, it would be red meat. But the idea is that if we have a varied diet, none of these things are going to be affecting us on a large level. And there's going to be benefits to all these different foods as well. So, any questions about that section? We're going to get into antioxidants. So now we're going to talk about antioxidants, why antioxidants are your friends. Other sources of inflammation that contribute to vascular injury by way of oxidative stress or damage include cigarette smoking, ingestion of bad fats. So we did talk about some good fats, cholesterol being one of those things. Saturated fat from animals is not as bad as we thought. If anything, it probably has some benefits. But there are some bad fats out there, and that's going to be oxidized, rancid, man-made, like hydrogenated type fats that don't digest well in the body. They often create rigid cells because of their structure, and that in turn can cause inflammation. And then having high blood pressure over a long period of time, if we think about the blood pressure in the arteries, you don't want it to be flowing through at a really high rate, because that is also going to cause damage. You want it to be on the more medium slow side. So high blood pressure, that's something that can usually be fixed pretty easily with diet and exercise. Chronic stress, which is going to cause some of these other things. I mean, stress alone can cause inflammation as well as high blood pressure. And then glucose intolerance. So that would be like type 2, type 1 diabetes and metabolic syndrome. When we have too much insulin in our system, when we don't have enough insulin in our system, insulin's the hormone that carries the sugar, the glucose around to our cells. And when we don't make enough, which is what type 1 and type 2 diabetes is, that sugar gets to run free and doesn't really have a home to go to. So it causes oxidative damage instead in our system. Toxic chemicals, so metals and environmental pollutants, that's always going to cause inflammation and oxidation in this case. The two are synonymous. Alcohol, that's an interesting one because it's the most accepted drug in our society, and it's like one of the most damaging, but we all love it. Copper deficiency, so that's kind of a weird one because you have to there's so many different types of either vitamins or minerals or metals in this case that have different forms, and the metal form is that you would get from like actually an actual metal, like I have a colander right there, isn't beneficial, but the kind that you get through food is. So there's different types, which can be a little confusing. Like you don't want to eat raw, like regular raw metal copper, but you can get copper through different foods. I'd have to look up which types of food are high in that. And then vitamin A and D deficiency is also going to cause oxidative stress as well. And those are also often, actually, both of those you get through, well, vitamin A, you have to get through animal sources of food. The plant source would be anything with beta carotene. So anything orange like carrots or sweet potatoes or squash, pumpkins, and then beta carotene is then converted to vitamin A in the body. And then vitamin D we mostly get from the sun, but there are some animal sources too, like cod liver oil and mushrooms have some. But both of those things protect against oxidative stress. Okay. Oxidative stress can cause a chain reaction of free radical damage. This is a causal factor in heart disease as well as the aging process on a cellular level. When LDL particles are altered by free radicals, they become oxidized and able to damage arterial tissue. For this reason, it is especially important to consume a diet rich in antioxidants. So we always hear that. You want to eat a lot of antioxidant rich foods. And I just listed all these things like cigarette smoke and stress and toxins and all that. But we are also creating oxidative stress just by being alive and just by having chemical reactions in our body, metabolic reactions on a regular basis. So we always want to have more antioxidants coming in than we are either just creating by living and breathing, or if we have any of these issues that I just listed, then you just want to have the most antioxidants as possible to kind of even that out. And I think I'm going to talk about some foods here in a minute that are really rich in antioxidants. And then, of course, fiber. We always hear about fiber in relation to heart health. And a lot of those foods that you'll see in the grocery store that have the little heart healthy symbol are simply deemed heart healthy, mostly just because of their fiber content. If it's something like a sugary cereal, like a Cheerios or whatever, that's not necessarily because of the food itself, but probably more because of the fiber that it contains. So fiber is key for a number of reasons. Insoluble fiber helps clear out the LDL cholesterol, which we just kind of want a constant turnover of that. We want to be clearing it out through our stools. And then certain types of fiber known as prebiotic fiber provides food for the good bugs in our microbiome, helping them stick around longer. So that is something that we talk about a lot in these classes. We want to have a healthy microbiome, and one way of ensuring that is to have a lot of good prebiotic fiber in our diet, just to help them have kind of a home almost, or something to feed on, which sounds kind of weird, but it will help the good guys proliferate. We get two types of fiber through our diet: insoluble fiber, which is the stuff that's found in whole grains, wheat cereals, and vegetables such as carrots, celery, and tomatoes. And then soluble fiber. Some sources include barley, oatmeal, beans, nuts, and fruits such as apples, berries, citrus fruits, and pears. And both types have been linked to heart health. The minimum baseline recommended daily allowance for fiber is 20 grams. And that's just, you want to shoot for 20 grams in a day. Sometimes I challenge people to just kind of add up their fiber to see if they're anywhere close to that. I've seen other people say that it should be closer to 40 grams, but the more, the better in this case. And then here, if you have metabolic syndrome or a history of heart disease, you really should be getting closer to 38 grams of fiber in your day through foods. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, one of my favorite sources of fiber are raspberries. And I think in 1 cup, there's close to 7 grams of fiber. So that would be, a third of your RDA if you had a cup of berries. Most berries are comparable to raspberries. But you can take a look at different types of foods just to get an idea of what that looks like, or check the labels on your boxes of crackers or things that you eat on a regular basis to see what that looks like. Okay. So this last little section is just heart healthy foods to add to your diet. Number one on the list is acai berries, which I feel like we don't really talk about that much anymore. They were really popular, mostly just because of their super high antioxidant rate. Although I'm going to show you a book. I don't know if I have it on here. No. So, as long as we're talking about antioxidants, I have this book right here. That's really cool. It's called Matcha. And then there's this little graph in here that I used to like to show people when we did these in person. So I don't know if you can see this here, but it's showing the antioxidants in different foods in grams. And there's broccoli, 31 grams, acai is 55, wild blueberries, 93, pomegranates, walnuts, pecans, dark chocolate, goji berries, and then matcha, which is ground up green tea, is 1,440 grams. I'm not sure the serving size here. Obviously, you're not going to eat a ton of matcha, but even if you just have that incorporated into your routine, that's going to give you a serious antioxidant boost. And I love the way it tastes. I like to heat up like a non-dairy milk and stir that in with some honey. I'll probably do that after this, usually around like 1 or 2, because the cool thing about matcha is that it does have some caffeine, but it also has theanine, so it doesn't give you the same like crazy boost anxiety thing that coffee does, which I have a little coffee in the morning, but then I can't do like multiple cups throughout the day. So matcha is good for that. And the title is just Matcha, and it's this really beautiful book, and it's got all kinds of different recipes in here and some history. So it's kind of a fun like coffee table book, but I just always thought that that graph was cool because it shows you how much of an impact that can make. So let's hit some more of these foods. So acai, obviously that's great if you want to incorporate that into your smoothies. It is still going to be high in antioxidants, just not as amazing as the matcha. And they are naturally high in essential fatty acids and fiber. Ample source of vitamin A, probably in that beta carotene form, excuse me. And then almonds are another cardioprotective snack, rich in monounsaturated fat, good source of vitamin E. So any of these fat soluble vitamins are usually antioxidants as well. So vitamin A, E, D, E, and then also magnesium and phosphorus can assist with blood sugar balance, decreasing the amount of cholesterol damaging free radicals that accompany large blood sugar spikes. And then broccoli is on there. We just saw that in the matcha book actually, which is surprising to me because I don't always think of broccoli, even though it's one of the most popular vegetables. But it contains blood pressure regulating magnesium and calcium, rich in carotenoid lutein, which is another antioxidant, which may slow or prevent the thickening of arteries in the body. B6 and folate also reduce the risk of atherosclerosis, heart attack, or stroke. And then in that same range, cauliflower is probably very comparable, as well as Romanesco. When we talk about vegetables and foods, again, I'm always trying to get people to try new things. So if you do reach for broccoli on a regular basis, maybe try one of those other things. Even though they're in the same family, it's just always going to provide something new for your microbiome, more diversity. And then cinnamon may help reduce cholesterol by assisting the breakdown of bile salts. It's also good for blood sugar regulation. It inhibits the release of inflammatory fatty acids from the blood's platelet membranes, keeps the blood the proper thickness. So people will actually even take cinnamon as a supplement for blood sugar control, I believe. You can almost take it as a pill, but it's always good to incorporate spices into our daily routine if possible. And cinnamon's something that can be used in a lot of different ways. We usually think of it as this sweet thing, and it's nice because it does add sweetness to a dish without the use of sugar. But I just made burgers the other day and put cinnamon in them. It's this burger recipe that they're kind of like Spanish style burgers, and you do cumin and cinnamon and oregano and paprika, and it just makes them taste way more interesting than a regular burger. Pastured butter. So again, just kind of getting back to those regular foods that have been demonized for a while. Butter the way it used to be, made from the cream of pasture, grass-fed animals. Fats from animals that graze on pasture are nutrient-rich and higher in anti-inflammatory omega-3 fats. It's also going to be higher in the desirable conjugated linoleic acid, CLA fats. Superior antioxidant content compared to grain-fed, conventionally raised counterparts. Of course, we're just going to get what we can afford and what we have access to, but it is nice to be able to get that if possible. Flax seeds, 1.8 grams of omega-3 fatty acids per tablespoon of flaxseed. They contain 75 to 800 times more lignans than any other plant food. And lignans in flax have been shown to reduce atherosclerotic plaque buildup by 75%, which is cool, obviously. Contains both soluble and insoluble fiber. So this is one of those things that is going to help both your microbiome and help your regularity and getting rid of that LDL cholesterol. So that's a really good fiber to add into things. You can put it in your smoothie, your oatmeal. I like to just get ground flax and keep it in the fridge because it does expire. It goes bad if exposed to heat and air and light. Someone's asking, is it all about antioxidants or specifically about matcha? Oh yeah, I think we covered that with the book. Just to get back to it, it's not all about antioxidants. That's just the one page. And then the rest is mostly like beautiful recipes. I've only tried a few of these. And then the beginning also has some history. And it is by Jessica Flint and Anna Cavaliunas. Not hard to, I can write it in the chat. Okay, next on the list is chia seeds, which are kind of in the same vein. They're an edible seed from the mint family, actually, and chia seeds were a main component of Aztec and Mayan diets and are popular. Again, I think everybody's very familiar with them. I used to make chia pudding all the time. Should probably get back into that habit because it's kind of a good breakfast and really good fiber. They're also rich in omega-3 fats, antioxidants, and minerals. They're definitely one of these superfoods that are good to have on a regular basis. Chia seeds do not have to be ground for you to enjoy. Your body can still extract all that nutrients from them whole. They just have to be soaked in some form of liquid. So to make chia pudding, it's really easy to just add, I think, a quarter cup of seeds to a cup of milk of any choice. So like oat or coconut. And then I usually do some sweetener, which might be like maple syrup or honey, and then some salt, maybe some vanilla. And then you just mix it up until they get really emulsified and the whole thing will be kind of pudding-like, which is nice. A nice snack or something to keep in the fridge. And then lentils made it on the list. I think that's something that we don't talk about a lot, but lentils actually have a ton of cholesterol reducing soluble fiber, which helps to reduce the risk of heart disease and stroke. They are a great source of folate and magnesium, magnesium, which both lower homocysteine levels and increase blood flow. Lentils are also a good thing to have in your pantry because they're just easy to cook and they cook fast. So they're a legume, they're a bean in the bean family, but they don't take very long, and you could soak them if you want, but you can make them pretty quickly and have them ready to go. And then, excuse me, olive oil, we all know about that one. That comes up over and over again. It's rich in MUFAs, which is monounsaturated fatty acids, also known to lower the risk of heart disease and lower the total cholesterol and actually block that LDL oxidation. So a lot of times with things like LDL, which has always been deemed as bad cholesterol, it's not the thing itself that's inherently bad. It's like what happens to it. And in this case, it's the oxidation that's causing that issue. And I believe it's like that particle size. Once it becomes oxidated, it becomes the hard, dense particles, which is what we don't want, because that can in turn cause damage within the arteries. This helps to normalize blood clotting. Some research shows that MUFA may also benefit insulin levels and blood sugar control, which is awesome. And it helps keep arteries clear so the heart can get enough oxygen. Quinoa, another one of those superfoods that we're very familiar with at this point. It's a complete protein and whole grain, has tons of fiber, excellent source of magnesium. It's also high in folate and phosphorus. So quinoa is a good one to substitute in for rice if you eat a lot of rice. Easy to just swap it out, and then you're going to get some different things, probably a lot more fiber and also that complete protein. Wild salmon is also good for heart health. It's an incredible source of omega-3 fatty acids that we probably know, particularly EPA, which is one of the long chain fatty acids that you're not going to get from a lot of other things besides cold water seafood. I think sardines would also be on that list, as well as like mackerel, anything on the smaller side, because we're trying to limit our mercury intake. As we move up the food chain, we get more and more bioaccumulation. So something like a heavy metal doesn't get excreted from the tissues of an animal, so it just gets absorbed and stored. And so as we go up higher in the food chain to something like a tuna or a shark, those animals typically have a lot more of those heavy metals stored, which is why they've been deemed as unhealthy to eat in large quantities. Thanks for finding the matcha book. Awesome. Strawberries, that's one of those foods that's kind of fun because it's like that, it looks like the thing that it's good for. So a strawberry looks like a heart, and it's actually a very good heart healthy food. It's super high in vitamin C, which we might know protects it works with collagen protection, and it's an antioxidant. So anyone who's done any research on like wrinkles and skin and collagen, we know that vitamin C is a very important thing for our skin and just our tissues overall. So vitamin C, it has even more vitamin C than citrus, which is kind of surprising. Vitamin K, dietary fiber, and flavonoids. Flavonoids protect against inflammation, heart disease, and cancer. Anti-inflammatory properties of strawberries even inhibit the activity of the enzyme COX, which is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug like NSAIDs, like aspirin and ibuprofen. So it kind of acts the same way, which I thought was really interesting, in very small amounts, obviously. And those are almost back in season, so we can start eating strawberries again. Haven't seen too many good ones up here yet. I'm up in Northern California. So I think you guys have a lot more access to the good strawberries. And then the rest of this, oh, here's the recipe for chia pudding. I didn't need to explain that all. This makes a larger batch with the 2 cups of milk. But yeah, the ratio is like 1/4 cup of seeds to a cup of milk, or more if you want to make a bigger batch. And I like to put, there's your cinnamon for heart health and some salt. I'm probably going to make some of that later today. And then a beet salad. Beet would be another thing that I guess we just didn't talk about, but definitely also heart healthy and also looks a bit like a heart. So that's fun. And another beet dip. And then there's a bunch of resources at the end. If you want to know more about the history of fat, I would suggest that Big Fat Surprise book that I listed here. And the matcha book's also fun just for recipes, but I would just grab some matcha next time you're at New Leaf and start making a little afternoon drink, because that will boost your antioxidant levels significantly. All right, so somebody says, oh, chia powder. Yeah, that makes a smoother pudding. That sounds kind of nice, because some people don't like the texture of the chia seeds. They can be kind of a weird thing if you have texture sensory issues. But yeah, you could either do that, or sometimes I blend it in the Vitamix and then it just kind of emulsifies the whole thing. But that's the end of the class.